Good evening and welcome to Undoing I Do with Stephanie in a Day. I'm Stephanie Hunnell, the owner of the Hunnell Law Group in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and your co-host for this evening.
And I am Adela Sherilyn Dow, the owner of the law offices of Adela Sherilyn Dow in Staten Island, New York. Hey, Stephanie.
Happy Thursday.
Yes, I'm looking forward to Friday because I have no court appearances.
Oh, nice. Hey, I don't think I do either.
No motions. No. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the respite.
Oh,
Although
yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to take the rest, though. I don't know. I'll figure it out.
I was catching up because I had a trial on Tuesday, settled, or Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't even know the days anymore. Yes, it was Tuesday. Finally settled. So that was put through.
Right.
That freed up a couple days this week. So I was catching up.
Yeah, I had a mediation that was supposed to go forward, and it was the weirdest thing because maybe about an hour before the mediation yesterday, it was supposed to be 5 hours. The mediator called and said, "Oh, I don't have internet at my office." And I'm like, "For real though? This is what, okay, well, all right, free day." So that worked out. What are we talking about today?
When this is like my life sometimes, when we just want it over, just be done with it. But what are the pitfalls when we want the divorce just over with? Because I tell you, in life in general, there's sometimes when you go through things that you just had enough. You just can't even take, like, you just are at capacity and you want whatever is happening to just be done, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. And sometimes that is actually to your detriment, right?
It's kind of like childbirth for some people when you're just like, whatever you have to do to get the baby here, it's fine. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's not fine. Okay. And so, yeah, I encounter people all the time who just say, I don't care. I don't care what we have to do. I will just sign. I want this done. I think my biggest takeaway, my biggest advice to impart with respect to that, and I'm not skipping to the end of the show, but my biggest advice is this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
This too shall pass. We all go through crap in our lives that we're like, do we really have to go through this right now? I don't want to do this. Well, that's called adulting.
Right? Mm-hmm.
And I think that's my biggest piece of advice for most of my clients. But before we get to that advice and flesh it out, this is a process. Divorce is a process. Divorce is not as simple as it was for you to go in and get the certificate in order to get married and spend the $25 or $35 to get hitched.
With all those wonderful, happy feelings of like, oh, I'm getting married. And, when you first get married, you're like, oh, that's my husband. And you can,
right.
Like, it sounds like amazing.
And you're like writing your name so many times if you changed your name.
Practice a new signature if you decide to change your name.
But like people who have extravagant weddings or very lavish weddings plan their weddings for years. Some of them. How do you think that you're going to get out of the divorce in less time than it took you to actually plan your whole wedding that you spent $150,000 on?
You know what? That's a really good point, because people do spend a year. I think that's probably traditional is to spend a year after the engagement and to get married.
Yep.
And I tell people to mentally prepare for a year before they get divorced. Probably now with COVID, it's a little bit longer because, it just really depends on how the court's moving and not moving,
Right.
depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So like a year and a half probably now, just to be on the safe side so you don't go stir crazy.
Yeah, you should plan for that. And if it happens in less time, then wonderful. I was actually just on a telephone call yesterday, not a telephone call, a Zoom call yesterday, putting a divorce through. And when I got off of the line, I called my client and I said, you know what? We didn't do bad. We did this in 10 months. We filed in June of last year, and the stipulation of settlement was signed by everybody yesterday. And they were, that we don't divorce people in New York immediately. We got to put in a whole bunch of paperwork that I personally think is unnecessary, but okay, it's what it is. What it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get through it. but the divorce is granted on the record. So she can't get remarried or anything like that now until we finalize the paperwork. But hey, 10 months. Can't ask for better as far as I'm concerned,
I
unless you
think
have
that's
any.
really.
Yeah, and they had kids, they had a house, they had
Mhm.
retirement benefits. We worked it out, and the adversary on the other side was really quite difficult, but we were still able to do it.
Oh, that's good for you. And I do think
Hmm.
10 months is probably, you should consider that a win, for purposes of getting something through, especially right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And with that case, there were some things that my client was willing to give up. But she
Mhm.
had gotten to the point where she was ready to be divorced. So she understood what she really wanted. And that was something that, you and I we talk about that all the time. And I was talking about that this week, with my firm, Instagram page. But you got to really, when you get to the point where you really know what you want and you're decisive, you can get in and out relatively quickly. So long as the other side is willing to play ball with you.
Right. And you were talking about, knowing your why. And I really liked one of the things that you said in your video, because you said you need to know your why, and then you need to call me to know that, so I can tell you the how. And
Hmm.
when you do that, I think it goes very smoothly. And I was actually having a conversation with somebody and a client, and I was saying, we need to focus on what your goal is for life after your marriage, life after divorce. What is it that you want your life to look like? Because if you can kind of focus on that, then maybe some of the things that you're hanging on to don't serve you anymore, and you could move on. But not everybody gets to that point right away. It's hard when people first file for divorce, especially if you're not the one that's filing. It's a process. It's a mental, it's challenging, and there's a mindset involved.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And people say, well, what do my goals have anything to do with the divorce process? Well, if you don't know whether you want to live in the city, or whether you want to keep that house, or whether you want your kids to go to different schools, or whether you want to be, whether you have a career that you want to pursue, then we have no idea as to what kind of package we need to craft for you. We don't know whether the house needs to be sold. We don't know whether we need to talk to you about refinancing. We don't know whether, we don't know a whole lot of stuff if you don't know what you want to do.
Right.
And
Right.
so, when you don't know what you want to do, and you have, you compound that with the I just want this over kind of mentality. I got to tell you, a lot of that I just want this over is based upon a whole lot of angst because of the fact that people haven't gotten clear on what they want.
I agree, 100%. 100%. We were talking about last week when we were talking about pensions and that kind of thing. And if you don't, and I forget, no, it wasn't the pension show. It was John Knocklinger kept commenting. And now I can't remember the thought that I
That was
was.
the pension show.
Was that the
Hmm.
pension show?
Yeah,
Okay.
where John said he was scared of me. Okay, John.
So if you don't know what you want, we can't really plan for it. That was my point. If we know that we're just going to divide the pension, that the two of you are going to be okay with that process, we can do it during the divorce litigation, and not dividing it, but at least preparing the paperwork so we can
Right,
present the quadro at the same time that we present the judgment of
right.
divorce and get it all signed off. That's just some one step that is it's an aggravator, a complete aggravator, because sometimes, like we talked about last week, it can last for months post judgment. We get that resolved in advance, and that's one less thing that you have to worry about, so you can focus on the other things that are more important to you.
That's right. That's
But you don't
right.
put that unless you know your why or a goal for your future.
Exactly. You don't know. I mean, are we going to do a set off between the house and somebody's pension? Well, I don't really know whether I want to stay in the house. I have no idea. Well, maybe I want to sell. Well, maybe I don't. That's a non-starter. We can't even then decide, okay, do we need to have the other spouse's pension valued to see whether there's some money that you can use from your interest there in order to reduce what you have to pay them to buy out their equity in the house that you want.
Right.
So these things stall your case, because I will tell you, there was one time where I was sitting there waiting for months for somebody to decide whether they even wanted to make a relocation claim,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or request. That
Right.
is a major thing that really, if you want to relocate, you should probably do it during the divorce, because
Absolutely.
as far as I'm concerned, the standard is a lot more difficult to reach once you've already divorced. And now we come back 2 years later. Oh, yeah, by the way, I was thinking about it before, but now I really do want to move to Chicago.
Right. And there's actually in New Jersey, there's some case law on point that says if you make that decision pretty soon after the divorce, there is a presumption that you were negotiating in bad faith because you made these arrangements regarding custody and parenting time, and then you make that decision after the divorce. The court can look at that and say, I'm not sure you negotiated in good faith for this, and we're going to stick you with all these counsel fees post judgment because now you're bringing this up.
Absolutely true. The same thing goes for people who know that they want to retire and don't say it in the divorce because I just want to get this over with and I don't want to have to deal with whether me retiring is going to impact how much I'm going to have to pay her, him, them with respect to alimony or spousal support. So let me just negotiate this alimony and spousal support over here, get this done, and then I'll decide whether I want to retire in a few months. No, boo.
Mm-hmm.
No, don't do that. Deal with your heart. Last year there was this whole thing going around about choose your heart, and people were getting all offended because of the listing of the hearts. And
Yep.
it was like, if you don't want to be overweight, then exercise, choose your heart. And people got really pissed off at that one. But
I remember that thread.
You remember that?
There was a couple of threads, actually.
There were. There were. That was one I just watched. I didn't really.
That hit people hard because
it hit me as I decided not to go for my walk that day. Right? I guess I just chose my heart, and so it was pinging on people because they felt they were, as my grandmother used to say, in the Bible, we were talking about convicted and being having conviction. People were convicted. They were convicted because they saw themselves in the situation. Just see yourself and move on. Like, don't get mad at everybody else because you're seeing yourself in a situation and you're not doing the work. Okay, anyway, that wasn't the point of the show. But that's a good piece of advice. Choose your heart and do your work. Mm-hmm. Do it in your divorce too, because if you don't do it, you're going to just buy yourself more litigation down the road. And all of that, I want this over, is going to poof in your face.
Correct. And I see that when we have to get additional discovery or additional documents for things. So for example, we're looking at some accounts and we see another account, or we see some, there's things that look a little fishy and we need to dig for additional information. All of that takes time, resources, unfortunately. And when people are just done, they're like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. But we don't know what's out there. Now you're making a decision based on no information.
And it always does matter, and you do care. There are certain things, like people will say to me, I don't care if I have parenting time or on the weekends. Yes, you do. You mean to tell me that you never want to see your child on a weekend? Is that what you mean to tell me? It's not true that you don't care. What it is that you feel like dealing with it is too difficult and you just want to wash your hands. You want everything to be quick and easy. And having it quick and easy does not serve you in the long run with divorce. Unless you just have no assets, no children, no ties. You guys got married in Vegas, realized when you woke up, oh snap, I'm married to you. And then, you just let the 6 months pass so that you could get divorced in your home state.
Yep.
If it's not that scenario, then it does matter.
100% agree with you. This is like one of the worst case scenarios that anybody could hear about. A divorce happens and there's a special needs child and there's allegations and the husband is like, I just want to be divorced. I think that once the divorce happens, my ex-wife is going to calm down and then I'll be able to see my child and it's going to be not an issue. So then he agrees to supervise parenting time, but the wife is going to be the supervisor. And so forever and all times, this is what she's hanging her hat on. Years and years and years of litigation, literally at least 6 years of litigation before we finally get to a step where he's going to be able to see his kid unsupervised. And he's not even a kid anymore. He's 23, 24 years old. But it's crazy. That's the kind of thing that can happen if you just say, I want to just be divorced now. I don't want to deal with it. when in fact he should have dealt with it then. They could have had whatever evaluations needed to happen. They could have had whatever screenings needed to happen. Go visit your house and see if it's safe. Whatever they needed to do then, deal with it, and then he wouldn't have been dealing with all of this afterwards.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It doesn't get better. So here's the thing, so when you fight for your rights, it's interesting. When you actually fight for your rights and you don't sit on your rights, I tend to realize that after the stuff goes down, after the SHI hits the fan, all of a sudden your opposition does actually calm down, usually. But if you're going to just sit there and let them trample on you, now they realize, oh, okay, I got you. They yoke you up and they have you by the neck for life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had, and it's usually, we were on John Knocklinger's show a few weeks ago, and, we were talking about some good divorce tips for men. And the deal was that there are so many men who will say just what your scenario was. It will get better. My child will see me when he, she, or they are older, and everything will be fine. No, because now if your spouse is really diabolical, they've used the fact that you didn't fight for your child to tell your child that you didn't care, you didn't want to see them, all kinds of nonsense. You're setting the bar so much higher for yourself when you go back and then try to ingratiate yourself to this child. You may have lost this child emotionally.
Uh-huh. Yep.
It's just not the right thing to do. It's not the right. And so what do you tell people? They say, I had a client whose wife was had a substance abuse problem. And he was like, but she's a good mother and I don't have money to go through this right now. And then 2 years later, the woman was living in a shelter with the children.
Oh, geez.
And what I found really crazy about that is that still at that point, the question was, how much is this all going to cost me? But my kids are in a shelter. Let me tell you something. Everybody, y'all would see me on everybody's XXX poll because I would be trying to get this money. Okay, don't tempt me out, please. I'm not really going to go on a poll right now. But I would be trying to get this money because how are my kids just going to be in a shelter if I can help it?
Mm-hmm.
If I can help it.
Right.
And now, how do you go back next year and say, oh, I knew that she was in a shelter for the last 2 years, but now I want to change the circumstances?
And we've talked about this before. You have to address the circumstances as they exist. And I mean, being in the shelter is a little more of an extreme circumstances because I probably think a court under any circumstances would say if you have the ability to have a child in a house versus a shelter, I think you're going to win that argument. But there's circumstances where, somebody has an alcohol problem and you know that they're drinking all the time. But you're letting the kids stay there for a year in and year out. And then all of a sudden, one day you decide, now I'm remarried and I think now I'm the better parent. And unless something serious has happened, I think that you lose that case because you didn't address it at the time. That you said, there's no real change of circumstances. This person was drinking before.
Isn't that crazy? And people, don't be shocked, y'all. This is what judges will say. Mm-hmm. This is what judges will say. And you want to clutch your pearls and be like, oh my gosh, but how could the judges leave the child in the situation? Well, the judge is saying, oh my gosh, how could the parent just leave the child in the situation back then?
Yep. And again, this is absent like something big happening or something, and not even totally big, but some event happening.
Right.
You can't just go in there and say, now I want this change. And again, you have to deal with it at the time. You can't just throw your hands up in the air and say, all right, I'm done. I just want this over with.
And, just signing any old thing because it's better than fighting. Mm-hmm. Waiving pensions. We were talking about pensions last week. I had somebody who came to me and said, oh, yeah, I just waived the pension because blah, blah, blah. And then now, a few years later, you still don't have a pension benefit because circumstances happened and you couldn't get the job that you thought you were going to get. And your spouse is hanging out in a beautiful $800,000, $900,000 house, retired with their full benefit, and you're over here now saying to yourself, please tell me that I can do something about this. I didn't think it through. No, you
That's-
wanted it over. It's over now.
Mhm.
It's over. And courts will not generally go back in to your case and open up an agreement that you signed voluntarily and had the chance to review. You don't have to have an attorney. If you say I didn't have an attorney, that's probably not going to get you a new case open up. Like
Right.
that's probably not going to work.
Nope.
Okay?
Nope, you're going
Because
to have
you
to prove. Yep, you're going to have to prove some sort of fraud, coercion, something like that. They hid this information from you. Otherwise, you're stuck with the agreement that you made under most circumstances.
especially if you come back years later.
Yeah,
Years later.
years later. Mhm. And that's the problem, is that years later, the people are no longer under the stress of going through the divorce process, and then they realize that they made a bad decision. Again, what was I saying? I said, on one of my personal page show, is you can't ride scared. That's the problem, is you're making decisions out of fear.
And she's told me that too. She's told me that personally. Oh, there you go, riding scared again.
It applies to so many circumstances. When you have this thing that stops you from making a decision or forces you to do something that you would normally not do because you're afraid of the consequence or the unknown.
And the same thing goes for people who are in domestic violence situations. I had a conversation with somebody who was like, okay, so what if I just remove the order of protection? Because I don't want to upset them. Okay, you have an order of protection for a reason, because you thought, hopefully you have an order of protection for a reason, and most people do. Most people don't use orders of protection as swords. They use them as shields. But you have this order of protection for a reason. So I'm trying to understand from you what makes you think that removing this order of protection and going back into the sphere that caused you this damage with the abuser, how that's going to help you now.
Right.
Because they may say that they're great, they may say that everything, but think about how many times they've said that stuff in the past. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they still haven't changed unless they got some substantial therapy and some really great one-on-one help.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, with these orders of protection, if the two of you aren't seeing each other and there's not really any need for, what's the harm of having it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I always tell people, I need to know that when you make this decision, you're very good with it. And it's because I need to be able to put my head on the pillow and know that I counseled you properly, that you heard my counsel, and that you willfully, willingly, knowingly waived whatever it is. And I will, in my office, have you sign what I call a CYA letter, because when you come back a few years later and you say, Ade, how come you didn't fight for that? You should have told me. No, Carol. Yep. Here is the letter. No, Justin, here is the letter, because I told you that this wasn't the right thing to do. I didn't tell you that because I wanted to see your case be prolonged. I told you that because I understood what your rights were, and I didn't want you to just give away the farm.
Yep, I agree. So I am of the school that as long as I give you the information so you can make an informed decision, I've done my job. There are circumstances when I think you're making the wrong decision because it's so unfair to you. And those are the times I will sit down. I do a CYA letter. I've also had people go through a property settlement agreement with me. And I have my red line changes that they want to reject. And I make them initial it and say, nope, don't want this change. And I've literally done that because I know that this decision that they're making is so contrary to what is fair or right for them. Because again, they just want to get it over. Or sometimes they have a level of guilt.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Nope. So, when you've done something wrong in your marriage and you're like, I just need to recompense. I just give them everything. They deserve it. Give it, give it, give it. You create monsters, right?
Yep. Because guess what?
Little boo-boos.
Wanting to take and take and take.
Trust us on that.
Yep.
It's like, but I gave her the entire house. Why does she want my entire annuity too? because you just gave the entire house, you gave all the jewelry, you gave the cars. Why not ask for everything else? Why not?
Mm-hmm. And then
Batting 1,000 over there. Might as well try.
Yep. And if you have kids and there's still other responsibilities post judgment, guess what? They're going to be wanting to stick you with every single extra dollar for those kids.
That's right. Every hockey, every cheer. You know how expensive cheerleading is? People were just telling me about cheerleading. I'm like, ooh.
Oh, cheerleading is ridiculous.
Thank goodness my daughter has no desire, because listen, we would just have to figure, she would have to come up with her own business. She would have to start selling stickers. I don't know, something. Start making some lemonade, some Kool-Aid, everything. She had to just make everything because that is too expensive.
She sold some backpacks. There was a little girl, I think I sent you the link like, I don't know, months and months ago. I saw it on CBS Sunday morning. I was like, that is adorable, selling these backpacks.
She'd be selling that backpack. She'd be selling the back. Listen, because cheerleading is thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah. And people would negotiate these agreements, and they say, "Well, I'll pay that because I feel like I should."
Meanwhile, it's $15,000 for that, 15 grand, and you done gave up your house, gave up your pension, you gave up your cars, you agreed to pay the 15, and all this other, and now you have no money to even pay attention.
Yep. And
don't do it.
With you, you're like, sorry, can't do that. Gave your mom all the money.
And don't tell the kids that you gave the mom all the money, please. Please don't tell them, even though it's the truth. Please don't tell your kids. I gave your mother all of the money. You listen. This was the bargain that you struck. Just don't strike the bargain in the first place that puts you behind the 8 ball simply because you think you want to be the good guy. Because at the end of the day, you still need to provide for your children when they're with you.
Right.
And if you've given up the whole farm, how can you do that? Now you're resenting the other person because they allowed you to give them everything and you no longer. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Sure, we all want the divorce to be over. If you hire a good lawyer, they want your divorce to be over before you walk in the door.
Right.
Our job is to figure out how to get you out of the situation.
Oh my gosh, I hate the divorces that last more than a year. Hate them.
Oh, I don't like them.
There are reasons that there's some complicated divorces that can take a long time. But for the most part, we kind of know where things are going to fall. We know what information we need. And if everybody cooperates on both sides to get that done, we should be able to move you through the process simply. Look, 10 months is great. Like you said, there was a complicated person on the other side and it still went through in 10 months. That's wonderful. Nobody wants them to last. Like I've had clients, you're with them for a year and a half and we're both sick of each other. Like we trust each other. We know but we're both like, let's go have a drink someday. Let's stop meeting here at the courthouse because we're both sick of each other. Right. Fighting these same fights with these unreasonable people because people can't move on.
Because people can't move on. Or they weren't ready to move on in the first place. You know, there's people that file divorces. I'm going to show you, I'm going to file for divorce, knowing damn well that you don't actually want to be divorced. And so you then start creating all these things to prevent the divorce from going through.
I have one right now where somebody is threatening to file the divorce and it got really nasty. So the other spouse, my client, was like, okay, yeah, now I'm all for this divorce. Let's get this moving. The other person's like, well, wait a second. Wait.
See?
No. Now I see your true colors. I'm done with you.
Done.
Mm-hmm.
Done. Got to be careful. You have to be careful. I really want to look into this. And John, I think, had somebody on his show, this discernment counseling. We really need to look into that. We need to get somebody on the show to talk about that because a lot of people just file these divorces and I don't know, that is really expensive. I think I would rather do something else with my money than to file a divorce just to get back at somebody, but whatever, if that's what floats your boat. But you really, I think it's very important to make sure that you even want to be in the place that you claim you want to be before you're there.
Mm-hmm. I do think that has to do a lot with like society's expectations. So sometimes people think this situation happened. The next step is for me to file for a divorce, or this is not going my way. So now this is my only next step. What else can I do? And maybe like family influence and those kind of things happen, and you end up moving along. But when that's not really what you want.
Yeah, no. And then and that will even further, because can you imagine the emotional pain that somebody is under when they're in that place and they had no desire to be there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And now they're there because of these pressures. Well, of course, they're more inclined to say, okay, I'll just sign.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't know, 10 years ago, a couple that they decided they were going to get divorced. The husband moved down to the basement, and they didn't speak to each other through the entire process. Complaint was filed, answer was filed, all of this discovery. We had a property settlement agreement drafted. We were really close. They had a conversation. Neither one of them wanted to get divorced. It was their first conversation after like 10 months of litigation. I'm like, my client didn't even tell me. The attorney on the other side said they're reconciling. I'm like, I can talk to her. Nope. She's embarrassed. She doesn't. I'm like, that's insane. It's insane. I'm not judging you. Hey, if you're going to save your marriage, I'm happy for you to save your marriage. Yep. I'm not trying to be in the business of, causing people or forcing people to get a divorce. If you're ready to get a divorce, great. I'm here to help you. But just having neither one of them wanted, but both of their families were pressuring them to get a divorce. They had teenage children, and they thought they were doing what's best for these teenage children because, they didn't want them to see their parents being wishy-washy or something. Crazy.
Instead of just going to counseling. Mm-hmm. That would have been so much cheaper and so much emotionally cost effective too. Right. Because there's an emotional cost to divorce.
Yep. Plus, living in the same house, not speaking. I mean, he's in the basement. That doesn't mean that you're not, in a different area code. You're
right. Right. You probably have to share bathrooms. You probably have to share a kitchen. You got laundry. Right. That's craziness. It's too much. But yeah, the bottom line is don't make hasty decisions, people. Haste makes waste, as my mother used to tell me back in the day. And haste makes waste, and you are going to regret that if you make decisions that aren't in your best interests.
Yes, and my takeaway is kind of stealing your takeaway. Know your why beforehand.
Absolutely. It makes the process a lot more simple when you know your why beforehand. This was a great show, as usual.
Thanks for joining us. We will be here next Thursday at 6 p.m. Look forward to
6 p.m. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.